This is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, and we're joined in the studio by State Environmental Conservation Commissioner Amanda Lefton, who's here to discuss the governor's budget proposal. Thanks for joining us in the studio, Commissioner. I really appreciate it.
Happy to be here, Dave. How are you?
I'm okay. So
Good.
I want to start with, how do we even get to this point where we've got the executive budget, and what does it look like for this to come together? How much input do you get into what the governor is proposing, and how much of it is the governor saying, hey, this is what we'd like to do? Can you maybe fill in the details?
Well, I mean, first, I think it's really important to remember the robustness of the executive budget, right? I mean, all the incredible proposals that the governor is advancing in order to protect New York's environment and really broadly to tackle affordability. And she's laid out a really comprehensive agenda to address affordability. She's been laser focused on that throughout her administration. And this proposal really shows a continuation of a record of accomplishments from Governor Hochul to put money back in New Yorkers' pockets, to fight for New York families, ensure that we're continuing to focus on affordability, on public safety, and on behalf of the Department of Environmental Conservation, I'll say we're incredibly proud of really specifically the focus on environmental programs in this year's budget.
But to get back to the question, how did we get here? How much of this budget is a product of the DEC saying, hey, here's some ideas we have, and how much of it is the governor saying, this is what I'd like to do? Can you maybe lay out some details that could go into a budget bill?
You know, I can't speak for Governor Hochul on how she's sort of looking at the entire budget, but I'll say for the Department of Environmental Conservation, you know, many proposals we're really excited to see through. For instance, in the State of the State, having the governor direct the Department of Environmental Conservation to require that leachate from landfills is tested before it goes to wastewater treatment facilities is a measure that DEC strongly supports. We're really excited to go implement. That's going to make sure that we're getting PFAS out of our waterways and is a really important protection.
And on that point, though, so after the testing, what is happening? What is the remediation plan to address that underlying problem that you might detect with this testing?
Oh, sure. Well, we have really robust environmental remediation programs. And a huge victory for this current fiscal year is actually the reauthorization of our Superfund authority, which not only gave us some additional authority to importantly allow us to do our jobs even better, but also increase the appropriation from $1 billion to $1.25 billion. In addition to that, our brownfield cleanup program is an incredibly popular program that's cleaning up sites all over the state and bringing those back into beneficial reuse in communities. It's a wonderful program. So we've got really powerful cleanup programs, but fundamentally what we need to do is actually get PFAS out of the waste stream. And that is really the goal and what the department has been focused on. How do we actually stop emerging contaminants from getting into our waste stream? And that's really building on a series of actions that the department is taking at the direction of the governor to ensure that we have really a comprehensive approach to this. So we're excited by the State of the State initiative that directs DEC to do this, which is then, of course, bolstered by the funding for wastewater infrastructure that the governor included, which is record investment, 5-year commitment for $3.75 billion for water infrastructure is an unprecedented level of investment that we're making here in the state of New York. It's really remarkable.
So it's a record level investment. How does it compare, though, to the need that is out there? Because it's one thing to say, hey, we're spending more than we did previously, but is it up for the demand that we have right now in clean water?
Sure. There's a tremendous demand for clean water, which is why this investment is so critical. And it's also why it's been actually so powerful that the governor and the legislature have appropriated $6 billion since 2017 for these programs. And importantly, this is municipal infrastructure, but the governor really recognizes that this is an affordability issue, right? When you have a rate base that's paying for this infrastructure, to have state funds to help infuse cash into those programs to make sure that it's really lessening the costs on New Yorkers is really the goal. And it's been really successful. We've seen a lot of really important projects move forward because of these funds. And ensuring that we have that for the next 5 years to come adds certainty that that investment is going to be there for folks in several years.
But where did this dollar amount come from? Is it just grabbed out of thin air, or is there a reason to believe this is a reflection of our capacity in terms of the work that we can do, or is it a calculation of this is how much money we have to spend?
Well, I think, much like everything, right, we're always making decisions about priorities, and the governor is essentially deciding to make it a priority to invest more in
But where
this
does the
program.
calculation come from? How do we get this number as opposed to $4 billion over 5 years or $2 billion over 5 years? Where does this number come from?
I think this number comes from the governor recognizing the need and the importance of this, as well as the success of the program. We know that clean water is something that everyone cares about. It's something we're seeing, the federal government and others back away from, and New York is doubling down. We know that there's a tremendous need, right? Way more than $3.75 billion.
Okay, and so that's what I guess I'm asking. So if the need is more than $3.75 billion, is the reason we don't spend $4 billion because we have to spend money elsewhere and we have a finite amount of resources? Is that kind of the calculation you're explaining that is being made here?
I think the calculation I'm explaining is that the governor is prioritizing clean water funding this year because we know it's so critical for our communities, and we know it's such an important affordability issue as well as a huge win for the environment. And she's deciding to increase funds for these programs because of the success. And then it's up to the governor and the great Blake Washington to decide how that sort of cuts in with other priorities outside of my purview. But we're really excited to see the increased investment because we know there's such a big need here.
Well, before we move on, let me reintroduce you for listeners just joining us. This is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, and we're speaking with DEC Commissioner Amanda Lefton. So another big issue for the governor was this idea of changing how the state's environmental quality review process is impacting the development of housing as well as some other developments. Can you walk us through what has gone into the governor's policy here, which is essentially to say, I think there are elements of this that can be either skipped because we've got other processes that are keeping an eye on things or other permitting that ensures a safeguard of the environment. But what sort of review went into coming up with that determination? Can you kind of explain how we got to here?
Yeah, first it's I think important to recognize that environmental reviews are critically important, that DEC has a robust permitting authority as well as local zoning. And those are important protections to ensure that as development moves forward, it does so in a way that is protective of our critical environmental resources or zoned appropriately for local communities. And so the governor is really smartly moving forward with a proposal that takes a hard look at SECRA and tries to truly incentivize doing the right thing. How do we make it easier to develop in previously disturbed sites? How do we make it easier to avoid impacts to the environment and our natural resources? And so by doing this, by exempting certain projects from SECRA, things like housing that are so critical for so many communities all across New York State, or green infrastructure that we know is so important for resilience and has other benefits for our communities. We want to make it easier to do those projects and to do them in a way that avoids impacts to the environment. And that is really at the crux of what the governor is proposing in her smart SECRA reforms.
The concern, though, that environmentalists have made is that it's one thing to approach this like a scalpel and to, as you're pointing out, narrowly apply this and apply it in certain circumstances where we know there are other safeguards. And then the alternative take is they're taking a machete to the state's environmental quality review process. So how do you ensure that it is a scalpel and not a machete? What is it about what the governor is proposing that ensures there are safeguards in place?
Well, what the governor is proposing is essentially saying where there is a previously disturbed site, so where there's already been some sort of activity that has occurred, that a site is already previously impacted, if you are meeting certain thresholds for something like housing, for instance, then you could develop that housing in that place without going through SECRA. And I think important to recognize in those situations, very often those projects receive a negative declaration anyway, meaning that they don't have an impact. And so we're trying to take what are sort of the smart proposals in that way that we know are already not having an impact on the environment and making it easier to do those. And that has great other benefits, right? Because then rather than going into wetlands, rather than going into other natural resources areas, we're making it easier to go in places that are previously disturbed that we know won't have impacts on the environment.
But that definition of previously disturbed, according to what I was reading, includes something like an old barn or shed on some farmland. And it seems like that would be demonstrably different than, say, a 99-unit apartment building. I mean, so is there room for improving that definition of previously disturbed, or does that make it sense to you why a barn should equate to some sort of housing project.
I have no doubt that throughout the budget process that the governor and the legislature will negotiate the budget and what that looks like. But I think conceptually what we're trying to achieve here and what the governor is smartly advancing is how do we make sure that we're really advancing our affordable housing goal. She's made tremendous investments in delivering affordable housing. And we want to make sure that as we look at something like our State Environmental Quality Review Act, we're thinking about that in the context of how do we make that easier to do the right thing so that we can unlock those affordable housing projects and those dollars that the state is investing to ensure success of those projects for our communities.
One of the things I was struck by in the rationale for this was that there are other permitting and licensing that projects are going to have to go through. And to me, though, I don't know if that's something that the state would want to trumpet at this point, given there was the concerns environmentalists have about how the DEC permitted a gas pipeline proposal last year after previously rejecting the same plan multiple times. So why should people have confidence in the existing permitting and licensing processes that they're going to look out for the environment if we are going to remove this other environmental threshold?
Well, you're right to ensure that we say that, in fact, all other permits, and as well as importantly, local zoning still applies, irrespective of what happens with these secret changes. Local zoning, and if there's any other permit that is triggered, the developer would still need to get that permit. And I think that as that moves forward, we know that our department, the Department of Environmental Conservation, and I have confidence in others and other regulatory agencies, will continue to carry out their duties consistent with the laws and regulations that are in front of them and deliver for New Yorkers and, in our case, for the environment.
So long story short, people should have faith in the permitting process and that you guys are taking the environmental impacts of projects into account when going through any sort of permitting or licensing.
Well, I think people can look at our processes, right? They're transparent. They're open to the public. They can evaluate those and ensure that all that information is out there. And, I'm very proud of the incredible team at the department and the work that they do every day. We've got a really dedicated and wonderful group of folks that, thanks to the governor, is growing in this year's budget by 45 additional team members so that we can carry out our duties and do so responsibly with a focus on implementing our laws and regulations. We're going to continue to do that.
And after a quick break, we'll continue our conversation with New York DEC Commissioner Amanda Lefton. If you're enjoying the Capitol Press Room, please consider making a recurring contribution to help make our journalism possible. To show your support, visit capitolpressroom.org/donate. This is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, and we're continuing our conversation with New York State Department of Environmental Conservation Commissioner Amanda Lefton, who visited the studio at the Capitol this week to talk about the governor's budget proposal, which includes $425 million for the Environmental Protection Fund, an additional $250 million annually in clean water funding, and additional staffing lines for the DEC. Can you talk about how the state scoping plan, which was crafted after the adoption of the 2019 Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, was utilized, or how you see it being followed in the governor's budget proposal?
Sure. Very proudly, New York State is continuing to be a leader in fighting climate change. And I'm incredibly proud of the work that the Department of Environmental Conservation has done, as well as our agency partners, to continue to deliver really important programs to fight climate change. In fact, most recently, at the end of last year, we completed our rulemaking to require that greenhouse gas emissions are reported. That was introduced and finalized in the short time that I've been the DEC commissioner. And in addition to that, we also moved forward with an update to the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative so that we continue to be a leader in moving that program, RGGI, forward, which is such an important regional partnership as we as states continue to come together. And this builds on several other pieces, going after super pollutants, ensuring that we're tackling food waste going into landfills, really looking across the board at really a robust suite of different programs that DEC has advanced, while the governor continues to also fight for clean energy. We're so excited that we've now had 5 court cases that keep our offshore wind projects on track. That's an abundance of clean new energy coming to our grid. In addition to soon Chippy will be finalized, clean new energy going into New York City. So really between our transition to clean energy, really, and having that as an additional source of energy for the state, through the great work that we're doing to reduce emissions, as well as stepping up into the fold where the federal government is backing away. Because they are dramatically backing away from these programs. The state is remaining a leader in fighting climate change and has done really a tremendous amount to implement that plan and otherwise.
So a lot of what you just talked about, though, are things that predate the governor's budget proposal. So what would you point to in this budget proposal that is a continuation of that scoping plan or helps achieve some of those goals?
Sure. Well, first, in this budget, for the first time in state's history, we have over $1 billion dedicated to the environment. So there's the clean water funding, which we've talked about, and also a $425 million environmental protection fund. And that EPF is so critical.
Don't we typically spend about $400 million on the EPF, though?
Actually, thanks to the governor is when we finally got to that level of investment
Sure.
on the Environmental Protection Fund. And last year, it reached $425 million, and the governor is proposing maintaining that record level of funding.
Gotcha.
And so between that and our clean water funding, over $1 billion in this year's budget for the environment for the first time. That's an unprecedented level of investment for the environment. And so the governor is advancing these really robust environmental programs, this investment that means so much to our communities. It's what helps protect open space. It delivers our climate smart communities programs. It invests in resilience and does so much for our communities all across the state. And beyond that, the governor has also included the state's share for the federally sponsored Army Corps projects, which are critical flood resilience projects in New York. And this builds on, actually, the governor including $1.7 billion in last year's budget for the Fire Island to Montauk Point project. In this year's budget, she's proposing advancing several other Army Corps projects, which is really just a small piece of the overall agenda that we have on climate resiliency, because as we continue to fight climate change, we know that many impacts from climate change are already here in our communities today. And so the governor has directed in her State of the State a really comprehensive approach to helping communities adapt to a changing climate, ensuring that we're investing in things like stream gauges that will give us real-time data on what's happening in a stream so that we can help prevent devastating loss from flooding, in addition to creating resilience and adaptation hubs for communities and ensuring that folks have the expertise and tools that they need to adapt to the changing climate that we're in. So, again, the governor is making unprecedented levels of investment in not only core environmental programs, but also ensuring that we are reducing risks to our communities as well as our environment from a changing climate.
Well, before we move on, let me reintroduce you for listeners just joining us. This is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, and we're breaking down some of Governor Kathy Hochul's budget proposal with New York State DEC Commissioner Amanda Lefton. You mentioned earlier that this is an ongoing process and that things may change. Have you been asked to prepare anything for potential budget amendments by the governor?
I have not.
Has the DEC more broadly been asked to prepare any amendments or think about possible amendments?
Well, we look at, as every agency does, when the budget comes out, we take a hard look at it. We make sure that there are no technical changes that need to be fixed or something that might be in there. And so our team's doing that robust review, but we're not otherwise preparing anything of significance.
And so if there was anything brought up, then it would be a surprise to you at this point. And I'm basically very, very coy, if you've been able to notice this, about asking about the possibility of inserting something into the budget language about some of our green goals that were enshrined into statute in 2019. But it sounds like what you're saying is up, at least at this point, as we're talking on February 9th, you haven't been asked by the governor to work on anything to make sort of changes as part of the budget on that.
Well, I'm not going to get out in front of any conversations that the governor could be having. I think the governor has been very clear about the need to ensure that we're continuing to fight climate change, continuing to invest in these critical programs to advance.
Why would you say she's been clear on it, though? I would argue that environmentalists would say that she sends mixed signals, given the fact that we're pushing a gas pipeline and then also slowing up the delivery of cap and invest. That seems murky at best.
What the governor said is that we need to ensure that we are affordably and reliably delivering energy for New Yorkers. Mm-hmm. And in doing so, she's also made a concerted effort to ensure that we are driving down emissions. The governor is a national leader in protecting offshore wind, fighting for these projects that are bringing clean new energy to our grid. She's been a national leader in advancing renewable energy, and at her direction, we've advanced a series of different new regulatory programs to ensure that we're tackling emissions. And so I think even as recently as the governor's statements last week, she said that she's absolutely committed to continuing to fight climate change, and she remains committed to fighting climate change. And we need to ensure that we're doing so with a lens of affordability and keeping the lights on. And I believe we can do all of those things. I know the governor believes we can do all of those things. We need to ensure that we're set up for success to do that.
So does that mean that the Cap and Invest program is counter to those goals? That we can't do lower emissions, and also do reliability and affordability?
I don't know that any specific program is counter or not counter to it. I think the bigger point is, as we look at things and we look at different programs, we need to ensure that we have that right lens, so we're building the right program to achieve those multiple goals.
Well, lastly, and the caveat being, I only caught about half of your 3+ hours of testimony, so I apologize.
You didn't listen to all of it, Dave?
I ran out of time. I'm sorry. So if someone asked you this and you gave an answer, I apologize. But is there anything missing from this budget that you'd like lawmakers to add?
Oh, wow. What a generous question. I mean, listen, I'm incredibly proud of the fact that for the first time, the governor has introduced an additional $10 million for environmental justice communities for a brand new grant program that is actually modeled after the community change program at the EPA that was, unfortunately, the Trump administration rescinded. So we're trying to ensure that we're supporting those communities and really focus on resilience. We're incredibly proud of the work that we're doing on our public lands to ensure that they're inclusive for everyone, and really proudly say that these lands are for everyone, and through the work that we're doing there. We're really excited by the very needed focus on climate resilience, how we're reducing risks to our communities from flooding and other climate impacts, including implementing portions of the urban heat island plan that DEC and NYSERDA worked on together, as well as our continued moving ahead work on PFAS and emerging contaminants, and ensuring that we are truly delivering clean air and clean water, because we have done so successfully through regulation over time, and we need to remain vigilant as we're seeing the federal government, frankly and shamefully back away from such critical programs, including recently saying that the EPA is not going to consider loss of human life in their decision-making and their regulatory programs. And so at the moment, DEC is really laser focused on ensuring there is no gap, that we don't see any rollbacks in the state, that we continue to have strong standards to protect our communities and protect our environment. So the governor's additional 45 people in our agency to invest in our team in order to ensure that we can continue to deliver for New Yorkers is really important. So while there is a tremendous need, right? We're excited about reforestation. We're excited about open space. We've had so many great victories on conservation as of late. We could always do so much more. I'm certainly so proud of the robustness of the governor's state of the state on the environment, as well as the investments she's made in the executive budget.
And just to be clear, though, is there anything you'd like lawmakers to add to the governor's budget proposal?
I'm excited for lawmakers to consider the bills before them. Right now, there's a lot of active ones.
Okay.
I'm excited about different proposals that can focus on things like waste reduction. The governor has twice now included different waste reduction proposals in the executive budget that the legislature has not acted on. So I think we'll see what happens this year. But I think the big picture is that we're really focused on delivering on our work. And while there could always be more investment, we're seeing an increased investment in our programs today based off of those needs. And we're going to continue to deliver for New Yorkers.
Well, we've been speaking with DEC Commissioner Amanda Lefton. Commissioner, thanks for visiting us in the studio.
Thank you so much, Dave. Nice to see you.
And for additional insights and analysis on Governor Kathy Hochul's $260 billion budget proposal, check out our additional Capitol Press Room interviews at capitolpressroom.org or wherever you download your favorite podcast.
Support for the Capitol Press Room is provided by New York State United Teachers, a statewide union of nearly 700,000 professionals in education and healthcare.